producers here with us today. Each one of them uses a different virtual fence company on their operation today, and they're going to be able to offer us some great firsthand knowledge about the pros, the cons, what they've learned over the past year working with the technology, and kind of how they're utilizing it on their own operations. So we'll just start over here. Tim, do you want to get us started? Just kind of tell us about yourself, about the farm, and we'll start there and we'll just go down the line and then we'll run it back through and you can tell us about the company you work with and kind of what you're doing with it.
Sure. Yep. My name is Tim Aulgur. I'm from Sling County. It's about 45, 50 miles west of here, Missouri. My wife and I, we have a small cow-calf operation where we're retaining our animals and selling direct to the consumer as a finished product. We are using no fence, and we've been with that for about coming up on a year next month.
Awesome. Austin?
My name is Austin Bailey. I'm from Perry, Missouri. We run a cow-calf operation and finish a few calves out. Also sell direct to consumer. We've been using Monil for 2 months.
Dan Bonacker, Cedar Hill, Missouri. Have primarily a row crop operation, but have a small registered Charolais herd, seed stock producer, and been working actively for many years to integrate those into the row crop side of the farm.
Christopher Hudson. I'm from Pike County, Missouri. Own and operate Triple C Cattle Company, primarily a registered Angus operation. We also row crop as well, and have used cover crops for 20 plus years and kind of integrating all of them together. Been using the E-Shepherd collars for the since last September.
I'm Gavin Talmadge from Rosendale, Missouri, and we have a cow-calf operation. Finished some cattle and row crop, and we're using the halter and Monil systems right now and seem to like them both.
Awesome. So I think kind of the biggest questions for a lot of producers here in the room, what I hear from folks is like, they want to know what pieces of advice you guys have for the folks out here deciding if virtual fence is worth it. What were your kind of main decision factors in deciding to implement that technology in the first place? So if you could just kind of like talk through your thought process and how you realized the impact it would make on your farm and why you decided ultimately to maybe go with the company that you did and how it's kind of impacted you so far.
Okay. A lot of these things have been hit on this morning, so it's going to be hard to reiterate, but I think peace of mind was mentioned earlier and efficiency. My getting into virtual fencing happened probably 4 years ago on a hot day like today where I was rolling up polywire and trying to find it in a bottom where some deer had went through, and I just was thinking like, man, there's got to be a better way to keep these things contained, and so I started searching. That led me to where we're at. So peace of mind in that area, it was one for us. Efficiency, I'm able to, draw a virtual line through, a tree line into maybe another pasture that's just on the other side of there. I'm able to harvest energy at the right time. I feel like that translates into some, healthier cows and just better herd health.
So my journey began about a year ago looking at them, and my full-time job is a commercial loan officer, so I travel quite a bit, and sometimes I'm gone for 2 to 3 days at a time. And a year ago, we had a big rain event and washed out both creek gaps. And I was over there at 4 a.m. Trying to fix them before I left town the next day or that day, and that got me thinking there's got to be a better way to do this. So with that, we've got a rented farm that's got a rough fence on a couple of sides, and we implemented that this spring for mostly peace of mind originally, and then we've been getting pretty aggressive the last 2 weeks with some intensive grazing in some spots that we hadn't really grazed even before. So it's been pretty interesting to see it work. This is with very limited cell phone coverage as well. I know that's probably a big question, but the Monil product has worked well as long as you got a bar of LTE and can send a text message. My cell phone app actually does not work in the field in several places, so I actually have to go to the top of the hill to draw maps and stuff because I have that poor of connectivity, but the collars have worked great. So.
Yeah, I didn't mention it earlier in the introduction, but I have the E-Shepherd collars like Chris does. So I started looking into virtual fence because for about 10 years now, I've been really managing my grazing and getting really intensive and adaptive with that. And the collars solve some labor and some infrastructure needs for me. So like during the busy times of year on the row crop side, planting, harvesting, not always able to manage my forage as well as I'd like to during those times, and particularly on the cover crop side of things, the herds might just get a whole 60-acre patch of cover crops and don't always have the time to be out there strip grazing that and really getting the best utilization of the rye or milo or whatever I'm grazing at that time. And so these collars have kind of put the man in the field while I'm in the combine, and that's what's really doing it for me.
So initially, I was not interested in virtual fence, and I was speaking at a Missouri soybean growers event about utilizing cover crops in our soybean rotation and making that work. And Rob was sitting in the audience and heard me talking about how our soybean yields had gone up if I was grazing cover crops in front of soybeans. And Rob kind of talked me into trying virtual fence more or less. And that has been a very, very good thing for me. I am very glad he did because it's taught me a lot about managing my cover crops, managing grazing, and opened up many new avenues for me that I didn't know were out there prior to having virtual fence. Just the utilization and options it's presented have been pretty impressive.
Yeah, when we started cover crops, our extension agent up in the area came to me and kind of introduced them to me, and I hadn't really thought about them. And honestly, when I looked at them, I didn't know much about them, and I went with halter at first because just the look of the collar. I mean, I just liked how their collar fit the neck. That seemed important to me that they would to stay on and stuff. And I mean, we do grazing now, but it's not intensive really. I mean, it's every couple 3 days we'll move them. And I mean, these do allow you to move them every day or however much you want to do it. I mean, we just do once a day now, but I mean, I know there's ways you can do more. But water is our biggest issue. I mean, just we don't have waters in a lot of pastures. We graze creeks and ponds and stuff like that. And I know they do recommend an exterior fence, but they do serve as an exterior fence. It is. I mean, they a poly wire is good enough, but I mean, they besides calves, I mean, they'll hold about anything. I do think that.
Gavin, while we're down there with you, do you want to talk about how the new field you acquired this summer that's about half pasture, half cover crops, and how you plan to use the virtual fence to graze that?
So this year we got a new pasture, and it's pretty rough. I mean, there's big old hills and hollers, and we there was 40 acres of farm ground on it, and we sowed 20 acres of it down to cover crop, and the fences are horrible on that piece. And we didn't have time to go through and do it. It's growed up in brush. So we used the O'Neill collars down there. And the halter collars, our existing tower wouldn't reach down there. We were going to have to put up a new tower, which was going to be quite a bit of money. So the O'Neill collars were available. So we used them, and they're working good. I mean, they've kept them in, and actually got a call this morning. Some cows were out, but it was the neighbors. I was able to look, and they were in.
Like exhibit A of peace of mind.
Yeah. I knew they were way back in there because, I mean, we got them crammed down, great. We're giving them about an acre a day on that cover crop. And it's keeping them in and working. And, I mean, they're grazing right to the line. And I will say the flesh on the cows with the collars, both sets, the cows are a lot fleshier. They seem a lot happier. I mean, they're flesh, which a lot of that is the grass quality this year has been really good with it being dry. But I mean, it's just our cows look fleshier than they have, I thought.
Awesome. No, that's great. We'll work our way back down this way and then we'll take more producer questions. Chris, do you want to talk about the impact it's had on your cover crop grazing and your grazing days per acre and kind of some of the things you've seen with that?
You kind of already stole my thunder on that.
I know. I felt bad, but it was cool. I had to talk about it.
So we put the collars on September 20th, roughly last year. At that time, I was grazing sorghum sedan grass sun hemp mix that was planted after wheat. And I was moving polywire every 2 or 3 days, and giving them about an acre and a half per move. And I thought I was roughly 90 grazing days per acre, something like that. We put the collars on. I took 2 or 3 days to get the cows trained, and immediately went to moving them about every 3 or 4 hours. The cows on this same field. And when we did that, my figures, I went from 90 grazing days an acre up to about 170, almost like that. And I know a big portion of it I probably could have made up going from moving polywire every 2 days to every day, but that just wasn't something I was willing to do, just from a labor perspective. I thought 2 days, every 2 days was enough for me. That immediately, within a week of putting those collars on, made me go, oh, yeah, exactly. This is something I should have considered before just Rob talked me into it. Then this fall, grazing Milo, I took a set of 40 cow-calf pairs, fall calving cow-calf pairs, through winter on 26 acres of Milo. Fed hay. I think I fed 20 bales of hay total to those 46 pairs, total, all year, all winter. And then this spring, those same set of cows went to spring cover crops on March 25th this spring. Started grazing a barley, cereal rye, crimson clover mix on 74 acres around my house. I know from grazing that in the past, that row crop ground, if I'd have turned out March 25th, I'd have grazed that 74 acres till into April, maybe, and I'd have been about out of feed. I pulled those 40 fall pairs off on May 25th. And I still had feed there. The only reason I pulled them off was because Dad was saying it's time to plant corn. So anyway, that's opened up my eyes. I thought for me, the collars would allow me to graze more acres and impact more row crop acres. It's turned into the opposite. I'm grazing way less acres and doing it so much more efficiently, which wasn't my plans, but man, it's been pretty neat too. Just the utilization I can get out of having those collars.
That's so exciting. And every time we have a conversation on the phone, Chris is usually like, guess what I got him to do now? And I'm like, oh, this is great. I can't wait. And so it's always really fun to hear. Dan, I know you utilize the collars on rented ground and you really like them from that component of it. Could you talk about that a little bit? And then I was talking to someone earlier about how you drew the alley across your pasture to move the cows. Could you touch on that too? Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, I run pretty much all rental acres, particularly in my perennial forages, the permanent pastures, and just not willing to invest a whole lot of money and fence and water on those pieces. And so being able to kind of manage the grazing within those with the collars is huge. It's like I just picked up another grass farm that neighbors mine, and the fence is awful. I mean, it's almost non-existent. Kind of like you mentioned, just didn't have time to get to it over the winter to at least get the perimeter up in shape. So there's something physical there around the perimeter, but it's not electrified or anything. But having the collars there, the coupling of the collars with, pretty raggedy perimeter fence that it's kept the cattle in. And I've been across that farm twice now this spring, and they do great on that. So I think there's a big place for these collars on, rented ground, maybe for a producer that's just getting into cattle herd, somebody young, and they're able to pick up that, less desirable piece of pasture in the area. They can get in there and get to grazing sooner and faster without the investment. And then plus, you take the collars with you, you lose that farm. You're not out there rolling up fence or pipeline or anything. So I think there's a big place for collars on rented ground. And then Caitlin wants me to tell a story about bringing cattle back up to the catch pen. So she had it on her slides there. I was strip grazing stockpiled fescue, basically since we put the collars on until about February, and got really great utilization on that farm. Again, no infrastructure, just some water. And, I was able to strip graze all through fall harvest and cover crop planting and everything, and I didn't have to be in the field in the pasture rolling up fence. But when it was time to bring those cattle back up, I intentionally left about an acre of grass in front of the catch pen untouched. knowing that I would work their way back up to that to catch them. So when it was time to do that, they were on the far side of this 100-acre farm. And I just kind of built a pretty wide, lane, maybe not as narrow as you would if you built it with polywire, and just sort of gradually move them up over a couple of days. And I had some back fences built that I could turn on as I could look on my phone app and see where they were at, and I would turn the back fence on. And eventually I worked them up over that day and a half period probably, and they pretty quickly found that untouched stockpiled fescue, and they just camped out there. And I closed that boundary in that evening that included the catch bin and that untouched piece of grass. And the next morning I got there, they were right there, and called them into the catch bin, and that was it. There was no hooping and hollering and stress, and I didn't put up a single piece of physical fence to do that. So I thought that was pretty cool.
You all starting to think of different ideas and different ways you could use it on your farms that maybe you didn't even think about when you walked in the room. That's kind of one of the coolest things about getting to hear from producer panels and stuff like that. So Austin, you're 2 months into this. It's new, and I think you were Manil's official first farmer in the U.S. or pretty close, right, Oliver? Yes. So I mean, being number one, that's a big risk to take with a new company and trying out the technology and all of that. Can you just kind of touch on that and kind of walk us through your thought process and the excitement that's kind of been around with that?
Yeah, so it was obviously a little bit of apprehension, turning out cows, and like I said, this was a rented farm, a little bit away from headquarters, I guess you'd say, and training them, I thought was these are 5 to 12-year-old cows, and I thought training them would be a bear and a nightmare. I mean, it's not a heifer that's going to learn, and they were trained within 4 days. And we started grazing with them. It's pretty nice to turn out on a 60-acre rolling pasture and have them on 4 acres without touching in a hot wire or poly reel. And with that being said, I love being out there and grazing as much as anybody. I'd love to do that full time, but now I get to go out and ride out there, and I don't have to go around and check perimeter fence. I go out and look at the cows, look at the grass, make a plan for where we're grazing next. That's the biggest change for me. I'm actually over there more often, probably about the same amount of time, but more often, and just don't have to be there as long. Don't have to ride around fences. Don't have to check, make sure trees didn't blow down. Obviously, glance at that every once in a while, but it's not quite the same level of urgency. So
That's awesome. And Tim, you're kind of the opposite. You've been in it for 2 years, or 1 year. Sorry, 1 year. But just like kind of everybody else here, you were kind of one of those very first adopters with it on the scene. So what was kind of that first initial push for you? I know you talked about the river bottoms and being up and fixing that fence. I guess being one of the producers and having the year experience, what would you tell folks in the room, things to consider when thinking about utilizing the technology?
Yeah, it's hard to match what all these guys have said because I'm just going to reiterate. But I think, yeah, time. We've been rotational grazing since I think 2017 or 18. So just a lot of labor. We've done everything from four moves a day to daily moves, and tried some different things. And so probably burned one of my kids out that doesn't want to do it because of that. I think the biggest thing would be like you said, we're out there probably even more, but your mind is able to think about other things than, oh man, I gotta pick that line up and pick them posts up and move it over there. You're still managing the grass, you're still managing your animals, but it's much simpler in your mind. I don't know.
No, that's great. I wanted you to talk also about the bull, putting the collar on the bull. I have the video up behind you, and I was going to play the video for people so that way they could see it. And then you can talk about how that you've used the collars on bulls on your property and kind of how that's worked.
Yeah, so we brought that bull over here to the university on Tuesday to get him tested, and he did really well. That's his first time getting a collar on, so we put the collar on when he was in the chute. He responded really well to it. I will say that there are some that when we put the collars on, they acted like bucking, animals. Like some of my calmest cows they really acted crazy. Some of my ones that I thought were going to go crazy just kind of walked out of there like he did. So there is a training period, that they're going to recommend. And so on my way to test this bull, I called Matt, and I was like, man, if I put this collar on, bring him back home, separate him by himself, he's not going to like that. I'm going to have to wait 3 or 4 days. The cows are ready for him. What if I just go drop him off, and kind of let him in? So that's what I did. I backed him up in the pasture. The cows, I have a video of that somewhere as well. The cows come up and stopped at the fence, which is not there. It's a virtual fence, and they waited, and I opened the gate, and he walked out there, and he just walked right to the herd, and he escaped one time the first day, and he went about 7, 8 feet from the perimeter, and I had him in training mode, and he finally walked back in, and he's not tested it since then. So that's another good option.
No, that's awesome. I was like, I have some of your pictures up here on the screen. If there's any ones that you want me to click through and kind of talk about with the cows and kind of how it's impacted your operation.
I think, like he said, we've got more grass this year. Obviously, it's been a good year with rain and everything for where we're at. Your first thought was, oh man, you can graze this a whole lot more acres, but now I don't have enough animals to graze the grass we got. So, which is a good problem to have. And I think, moving forward, that's a huge opportunity as well for maybe guys that got cattle don't have grass, teaming up like that.
Awesome. I think at this point, we'll go back to pictures and let them talk about some of that stuff again in a little bit. But I want to hear from you guys. What burning questions do you have for our producers? I was like, a lot of hands went up really fast. Okay, do you want to talk about creep grazing and the calves going under or being able to go out of the fence? Anybody feel free to touch on this as we go. Experience of calves going ahead of the cows and hitting that fresh forage first.
No big deal. I mean, for me, they did it with the poly wire, and that was just fine. They go out ahead of the cows, but that does, there's a place for permanent fence in systems like this. You don't want them pre-weaned calves to just be, a mile away from mom, which they will do. So there is a place for permanent, but a little bit of creep grazing, no big deal.
That picture's, I think, maybe a month ago, or probably 2 months ago, maybe. I'm putting collars on calves, some 300-pound calves next week, so maybe I'll let you know how it goes.
I was like, yeah, keep us updated and we can.
Because they will band together and kind of start, traveling.
Tim also posts tons of no-fence content on his Facebook page all the time. I'm friends with Tim on Facebook, and so it's really fun to get to be there and see you sharing that with folks all over and giving the opportunity to see that. Chris, I saw you were going to say something about the calves.
Yeah, the calves aren't an issue. It's almost been a good thing for me because not only can you creep graze and those calves will get out ahead of the cows, it just works for some reason. This spring, I had fall calves, so needing to be weaned, grazing cover crops, and the field I was grazing is right in front of my place of business. I also sell seed for a living, and they had access basically to the whole seed facility if they wanted it. But long story short, where I'm going with this is I had polywire around this field because there's no permanent fence. In the morning, I'd go unhook my polywire that comes in and out of the seed facility for truck drivers to come in and out. Calves never bothered it. Usually in the evenings, I'd remember to close the polywire. But those calves, once they kind of figure it out and figure out that mom's going to be over here, they graze, 100, 200 feet away, just in front of those cows most of the time. Sometimes they decide to make a hot lap around the field or whatever, but they always would end up back towards those cows. So it really wasn't a big deal. I saw it actually as a positive.
Awesome. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I can say for the calves as well, it's the same, but we got on our halter collars, we have one bull. He's a yearling bull. He's got a halter collar on, and then we got I think he's a 3 or 4 year old bull. He's pretty big, but anytime you go in there, the old bull, he's right there with the cows, and they're crammed down in 2 or 3 acres. We're giving them 0.03 acres a day, per head, and he's right there. I haven't been over there once because we go ahead and supplement them still every day with corn, and he's there every time. The old bull is, and the young bull, like they said, I just put the collar on him the day I was turning him out, and I backed up I made sure on my phone I was in the paddock. I have made that mistake before. Like, that's one thing you got to make sure when you feed them. You got to, if the line's close, I have fed them on accident outside the line, and they will not go to that feed outside the line. I mean, and cows like feed, but it does work. So
Awesome. I saw some hands over there. Does someone have a question? There we go.
With the collars and grazing in timber, are you finding that they're coming off with the cows rubbing on trees or anything? Have you had any issues with that?
I lost one yesterday morning. They've been on for 2 months. I've had them on 65 cows. And it was on a thorn tree that excavator had come through and cleaned up some brush and left a thorn sprout about 1 inch in diameter, about 6 feet long. And I'm guessing she got it hooked on that because it was laying right next to that. Other than that, they've been in some timber and haven't had any issues.
I've lost 3 in 9 months. Every time, one was on a power line pole, one was in some timber, one was in some brush. Just, it's part of it, I think.
I was gonna add, sorry, Dan. I was gonna add that cow has only been beeped at the most in the last week 3 times. So I'm not planning on putting it back on until this fall whenever we catch them. Most days she was only beeped at once. That's not even pulsed. So and that's something else I was gonna say. I guess I can track how many beeps and pulses they get. 10% of the cows get 95% of the beeps and pulses. So by and large, 90% are just following along. They're not pushing the boundary at all.
Chris, I thought you were going to talk about the flipping of the collars and the brush and the trees. That's what I thought you were going to touch on. That's probably what we see the most with the Gallaghers.
Yeah, so that's been my biggest issue with Gallagher. And I think Gallagher has some advantages that the others don't. But the disadvantage I've really seen with the Gallagher collars is they've got a neck band. And the neck band holds chains that go underneath that hold the pendulum. The neck band, I've had a ton of issues with neck bands flipping over. And when they do, those chains can rub raw spots in cows' necks. That's been my bigger issue than collars coming off, is those neck bands flipping over. And we've tried a million different things, or not a million, but several different things trying to get them to work. I continually am resizing collars, trying to keep them tight to where they won't flip, and it's still been an issue. That's one thing I hope Gallagher improves in the future, but that has been an issue for me. And I'll average probably 1 neck band a week flipped over. And that's been a bit of an issue because it's one of those things I feel like I need to take time out of my day to go correct that issue because I sure don't want a raw spot rubbed or whatever. But I know from talking to those other people, the Gallagher interface on the phone, I think is better than maybe some of the other companies. So I think there's some advantages and disadvantages to each brand, just from an outside, non-biased perspective, I think.
I've had a little issue with the halter collars. A lot of times when we go through the chute, we got them on 50 head. You'll break 1 buckle going through the chute. I mean, when we AIL our cows, so I mean, they were going the chute, 3 or 4 times before they get bred, and we broke one about every time. We've had some come off just out in the open. We've had a little issue with the ends fraying, which is fine. They'll replace them, but I mean, a lot of times when you're working cows, you don't have one handy, and you're kicking them out, and they may not be back in for 2 months. So that's kind of been a struggle there. I haven't had the Moneo collars long enough to know, if I haven't lost any yet, but it may be an issue, I don't know.
I've only got 35 collars. Knock on wood, I had 1 slip off a yearling heifer the day after I put it on. That's the only collar that I've ever had an issue with.
Awesome. Did you have a question right here?
Yeah, on the young calves that you're going to put a collar on, are you going to use like the goat-size collars, or are you going to use the full-size collars?
I'm going to use the full-size collars.
guess my question was, since those calves are going to be growing, how long you think you'll leave them on before you adjust the size? Just kind of watch them, see if it get tight, or what?
Yeah, I'm sure I'm going to have to adjust. That might be a little easier than a call from the neighbor saying they're in the swimming pool or something. So we'll keep you updated on that.
Adjustment goes the other way too. Like as my spring calving cows have milked down, the collars have gotten a bit looser, and I've had to tighten some up. So.
Yeah, in the 9 months I've had collars on, I've run all of them through 3 different times to readjust size. Just as Dan was saying, as cows milk down, when they're nursing a calf, you got to readjust. As you wean calves, about 30 days later, those cows have put on some flesh. I've had to open collars back up a little bit. So that part's been, it's not labor free. It's saving you daily labor, but there's some added steps at other points.
It's the trade-offs back and forth. You get the benefit of the technology, but yeah, your labor just ends up in a different sector than maybe going out and moving fence every day. So I think that's definitely a good point to hit on from that standpoint of it. Do we have? Oh, okay. I gotta follow the mic. Raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll get you a mic.
Okay, Dan, on the creep grazing calves with Milo, did you notice any different behavior with those calves? I know you said they stay with the cows, but what do they do to the Milo that they go out into?
So I didn't have calves on the cows that I graze Milo. It's dry cows, but Chris did have calves, I believe, on his, so he might be able to answer that better.
Yeah, so this winter, the Milo I grazed was with fall pairs. So I had fall calves. Like I said, they would get ahead of those cows, 100 feet. They'd knock down some of the Milo. But my thing is, and I was telling somebody in the back, one of the things I would do every 2 or 3 days is make sure I went and looked at my Milo, and anywhere that I noticed the calves had knocked some down or wind or whatever, I tried to target those areas. And that's the cool thing about the virtual fence is just because you're moving across a field doesn't mean you have to keep doing it that way. You can go down into a little crook or a cranny or strike out across the field this way if you've got some down Milo or some of the calves knocked down, and go after those directions. And then the other thing I did was I kind of made a creep area for my calves. I basically left a square of Milo around a loaf area where the cows seem to like to hang out. Fence basically made a spot where the cows couldn't get into, put a pretty good bale of hay in a rack, put the creep feeder in that area. Essentially, I had a creep area because of the virtual fence. So that's something I really liked. You know what a cow does to a creep feeder? They're constantly banging on it, trying to get in. All of a sudden, the virtual fence, if you can put a perimeter around that creep feeder, helps. It's amazing my creep feeder's in better shape this year than it was in years past.
No, that's great. You got one?
If I understand correctly, you mentioned that the manufacturers will download the map of your farm into your program before you start. Is that correct?
Yes, that's typically the process you'd go with. You'd work with the virtual fence companies and you'd upload a map of your farms and you'd work with them to figure out like the boundary limits of like, if it's tower based, that's where more or less that comes in. If it's cell based, they'll map out the perimeter of your farm. So then you work within that designated area.
Okay, so then when they mentioned renting pasture as well, you just go back to the company and they get those maps for you, or
So
how does that
these companies on the software, they just use the GIS data that's available. Google Maps, Apple Maps, you name it. I think you can select, at least in Gallagher, you can select between pretty much every map option out there. So it's just like getting on your phone and looking at satellite imagery. That's what you draw your boundaries on top of. It is that most recent satellite images.
It differs a little bit across the companies because like Gavin, we had to go through and we had to upload your maps. And with Halter, you kind of are more confined within those definite boundaries with the tower, right?
Yeah, with Halter, with the tower, you had to go in and you had to talk through your farms and they had to map, they give a big exterior boundary and they had to see if the tower would reach and there was dead zones in it and stuff like that. I don't know what it'll be like with the satellite. But it is very easy, though, if you add a farm. We wanted to graze a couple of different farms. So you just call them and they can expand it pretty simple. So with Monil, it's just a cellular. I mean, it's just like they said. It's just like looking at Google Maps. You can go anywhere and draw a map. So.
Awesome. Yes.
So what do you think your stocking rate changes will be on like your native grass or your summer pastures? Will be able to increase it by 10%?
So I turned out a month later because we were waiting on O'Neill's collars. Well, O'Neill's obviously brand new to the United States. They're waiting on approval, but we ended up getting them May 1st. We turned out a month later than usual, but we bumped our stocking rate 50%. And with all the rain and moisture we've had, I don't foresee an issue at all with that this year. That obviously isn't going to be across the board. It's going to vary per year.
Where I have water and fence infrastructure already in place, I'm not seeing a huge increase because I was out there every day with the polywire moving anyhow. But it's these farms without as much infrastructure where it's really going to see an increase, and like I would say double potentially on some farms because I was continuous grazing, on those, and this is, I do have intentions of building the water infrastructure on these rental places, and so. Kind of as I get that in place. And the collars are buying time they're buying a little time, they're increasing a little efficiency, but once we get water in place, efficiency gets even better.
I'd see a big advantage to grazing, like just crop stock fields this fall too. I mean, I think you could double or even triple your stocks. I mean, because it just seems like a cow tromps over it in 2 weeks, whether it's 100 acres or 20. And I mean, there's no limit to that, I don't think.
Yeah, we're in a hurry to get our, this fall we'll be in a hurry to get the spring cows collared because we go to corn stalks with them. And historically we have underutilized that, and I'm fully aware of that, but just didn't have time to move fences every day. And I think it's going to be a huge stocking rate increase on corn stalks and get us a lot further into winter before feeding any hay. And not to mention cow health is going to be better too, because we all know that when we turn out on corn stalks, they're going to have acidosis the first 2 to 4 weeks. So it's just something else to think about as well.
I did double my rate this spring on grazing rye early spring because I, wasn't out there stripping in the past. I just let them have a piece of acreage, and so being able to do 3 times a day moves across that, I doubled my stocking rate easily. So.
Awesome. I think I saw another mic somewhere. There we go.
Most of you have addressed cow-calf situations. Do you have any experience or know of dealing with backgrounding stalker calves where they're a little dumber, wilder, whatever, and just how that would work?
Last fall when we put them on our heifers, they would have just been, they would have been born that spring. They were going to be replaced, or I need to think about that. They would have been a year and a half old, and they're kind of, you could say dumb, and they got along just fine. But the issue I would wonder about backgrounding is just be the time it would take to train them and getting all the collars on. And then you'd be pulling them off, pretty quick. Your time would be quite a bit of time, I think, as far as that goes. No, they did fine as far as that goes. They trained just fine. I really think any animal will train just fine. The training's not an issue at all, I don't think.
Same experience with my yearling heifers. They trained just fine. So, but as far as stockers go, I wouldn't want to do this collaring process and training process on calves you're pulling out of the barn, and maybe you're on like a 90 or 120 day turn on those stockers. I'm just not sure it's worth the hassle. Yeah, but I don't know. That's speaking without experience. That's just my thoughts on it.
And I did the same thing. I have a set of replacement heifers that we collared and trained in May. Was that? Yeah, in May.
Oh, yeah.
And we called this group of heifers the silly heifers because, man, they were pushing on fences and just always acting stupid. And that was one of the reasons I put the collars on them, is I was tired of dealing with them, and moved them to a different farm. So the training process only took 2 days with that set of heifers. But I agree with Dan. I don't know if it's all worth it on a set of stockers if you're only doing 60 or 90-day turnaround.
I will say later today we're going to hear from Dr. Derek Brake and some research he's doing down at South Farm. And I know the calves that he used for that study, He bought them from the sale barn, brought them out to South Farm, threw collars on them, and it was a group of sale barn calves, and he didn't have any problems with them getting trained. And they had very, very few problems with actually getting them to respect the virtual fence the whole time. I think it was like an 8-week study. I don't see Emma or Derek in here at the moment to correct me, but you'll get to hear from him this afternoon, and I think that would answer some of your questions with that too. I don't know the exact number off the top of my. I'm getting told 5 weight calves coming straight out of the sale barn. Yep. Awesome. Gotcha.
Can any of you speak to utilizing ponds as a water source and limiting access of the animals not entering into the ponds? Are you able to creep right up into the edge?
Yeah, I've done a bit of that, more on creeks and things, but also I did it once in a pond. But yeah, once I got comfortable with the accuracy of the collars, Gallagher had said it was 10 foot plus minus, and what I was noticing, like grazing Milo and strip grazing this winter, was that accuracy was far better than that, down to the line. And so I started, like you said, just giving them just a little bit of a wedge out of a waterway, and they respected that totally. And I was able to move that area where I was grazing in the creek. I kept moving that down. They weren't going back to the same spot the whole time. So that's one way I used it.
My dad, his saying was, those collars probably aren't running RTK, but they're on WAS, if anybody's familiar with row crops. So it would be like a 1 or 2 foot line transition or movement, not a sub-inch, but they're still pretty darn good.
We grazed, so we got some ponds that we grazed up to, and sometimes we would let them in the ponds, and then other times it was nice to be able to keep them out of them. And one thing with the Halter app, though, you can't do exclusions, and with the Monil app, you can. But I do like to be able to exclude cows out of the pond because they do just want to go in and stand there, if you got an extra water source behind it. But, it does, like they said, I split across the pond, just split the line across it so they would just stay on one side and drink, and not be tromping through it. So
I believe it was touched on earlier about having 2 herds. Has anybody where you can set up 2 herds on different sides of a farm and it's not an issue with your apps and everything?
Yeah, that's all super easy within the app. At least I'm speaking on the Gallagher side. That's real easy to set herds, and you can name them and change the color of the dot even. And when you go to make moves, it's real clear which group you're making a move on. And I've even ran those groups together in the same pasture. And like I had a group of cull cows that I was pulling off every few weeks. They were going to butcher. And so anytime it was time to catch those, I could just sort that group off and run them up to the catch pen. So it was very simple within the software to do that.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything he said. And I've even done things like I have collars on 2 donor cows that, like getting them up prior to flush day and things like that, give them a separate paddock, essentially, from the, sort them off. It's so simple. 4 clicks of a button, you can sort those 2 cows off the night before, give them a different paddock, and then they're easier to catch the next day. So
we had to separate some cows with the Halter app because we had a little trouble when we calve all those heifers. We bring them up in the barn, and when they'd go in the barn, we had a calving pin. If we had trouble with one, it would actually start beeping at them and shock the cows inside the barn. So we had to pause the herd in the lot, and then as soon as they'd calve, we'd kick them out. Well, that was pretty simple. They just were able to draw a loop around them, and pause those collars. And then as soon as they kick them out, they're back on. So
I think you bring up a really good point, Gavin, and a point to talk about with the collars is like inside of metal buildings, or if you get really close to like metal building structures and things like that, that can start to mess with that GPS signal. So it's something you need to be aware of if you're bringing cows into catch pens and stuff like that, to potentially pause those collars. If you're bringing them inside the barn, to pause those collars, just because you don't want to end up in a situation where you are accidentally shocking your cow as like they enter a building or coming out of a building right away. You just want to keep that positive animal experience with it. And No Fence kind of has a solution they're working towards with that. Do you want to talk about that, Tim, with like the beacon and like the herd net side of it? Or do you not use beacons?
I don't use beacons.
Okay.
The herd net side is where one collar
Yep.
connects
Can you
with another
touch
collar.
on that? And then I can touch on the beacons.
Yeah, I guess just if you've got one collar that connects, to your app or whatever, then it will connect through collar to collar to collar and kind of control their movement there. But yeah, I've not used the beacon.
So how fast are your updates because you're talking that's an issue that I've had with Gallagher is it takes a long time for an update. So how fast are you seeing an update with that HerdNet deal?
Sometimes it's like momentarily, and sometimes I'm waiting there. I don't know that I've ever waited more than maybe 10 minutes
Okay.
to where, it'll say, pasture loading to the collars and then movement done.
Yeah, it's 10 to 20 minutes on the short side now, just because each collar has to make a communication, cellularly, and sometimes that's not all at the same time between the whole herd, and so it takes quite a while to update. Like he's talking about getting them up and pausing the boundary to put them in the catch bin. That takes a little bit of thought ahead of time to make that happen.
And one of the reasons we went with no fence and I called them ahead of time was to check our cellular coverage, and we have really, really good where we're at, so that could have some play in that too.
On the O'Neill collars, when we turned them out on that new pasture, we had them about 5 miles away, and I didn't know much about them. We trained them, and then as soon as we bred them, they were bred, so we kind of wanted to wait we wanted to get them kicked out to pasture about that 4 or 5 day mark. And so we took them a little early, and I drew a boundary, and we threw them in the trailer and drove down the road and moved them. And when I got down to the pasture, I don't have much patience, but there was nothing on the app. There was no cow that was located there. And so there's some wild cows. And I opened the trailer and kicked them out. And they just took off. And as I was pulling out the gate, you could see them start popping up on the app, and they were all stopped at the line. They had signal before I did. And I thought that was pretty amazing where you were able to kick them out into a 5-acre trap and they just took off running. They all stopped. So.
Yeah, the satellite signal to the collar is basically instant, and it holds that. It's the cellular or the base station side, the communication between the app and the collar on your end that's a bit slower.
You have a question, Brett?
Yeah, I do have a question, and he started to get into it a little bit, but given that you guys have all different resourcing here, my question was more focused around the pre-programming of the shifts, and are you guys happy with that across your different apps? And is there any situations where you wish that it was different, and how?
You're talking scheduled moves?
Yes.
I love scheduled moves, and I think that's something that Gallagher is probably better in from what I've heard, in the fact that I'll go in a week, 10 days sometimes in advance and schedule my moves, especially like if I'm doing every 3-hour moves. I don't want to get on my phone every 3 hours. So like my ritual on last fall grazing sorghum sedan grass, sit down on Sunday evening, make my moves for the week. Don't look at it again. I'm done for the week. And that was 3-hour moves. So I was usually scheduling about 50 moves for the week and done. That part's been awesome with Gallagher.
I can say in the Halter app, I do get a little frustrated sometimes because, from the time you click move, it's 12 minutes. And I don't know what I'm doing enough that I still like to go out and see the grass. If there's more grazing there, I hate to move them early. So I still go out every day, and kind of look at the grass. Some days you can tell, but that is frustrating. It's 12 minutes, and if you screw up, it's 12 minutes before you can redo it. So, you either sit there and wait or drive off frustrated, but.
Yeah, I share those frustrations with the Gallagher. I'm still trying to implement adaptive grazing practices, and in the summer on perennial forage, get out there, boots on the ground, look at how they graze, look at what they're heading to, and adjust sizing that way. And to do it instantly on your phone like that just doesn't happen. You're going to wait a while for a paddock to update. But as far as scheduled moves go, like I'm doing on dormant forage or stockpiled forage, that the scheduling works awesome. I think Caitlin had a picture up there where I was strip grazing rye this spring, moving them 3 times a day. I set it up for 4 or 5 days, and we went on vacation, and I didn't have cell signal where we were. And I just told my dad to go over there and take a look at them, once or twice a day. But they made those moves entirely by themselves. The program did it all. I didn't once worry about it. So.
Gavin, will you? Oh, sorry. Go, Austin. Then I'll ask my question.
O'Neill does not have scheduled moves at this point, but I do think they're actively working on some app changes and updates. actually talked to one of their team members this morning early, so I think they're actively working on that, but they do not have any scheduled shifts at this point. Honestly, at this point, I know how many acres are less than that per day. Usually about a quarter acre shift on 54 cows, and I'm doing that every 3 or 4 hours during the day at this point, and getting some pretty cool results from that. So.
Do you want to talk about it on the no fence side, Tim?
I'm not sure that No Fence has that option. If they do, I don't use it. I'm just on perennial grasses, and I'm there every day, and so that's kind of how I visually do it. But there are times, like today, there's supposed to be a 90% chance of rain. Maybe I know I've got them packed in tight, and I don't want them pugging stuff up. It's raining. I can't get there. I'll just go ahead where I'm at, sitting. There's a grid on the app, a 50 foot or 25 foot, and I just and go about it.
Gavin, can you touch on the vibration feature of the halter collars and how it works, and versus like if the paddocks are touching, how you can use that vibration feature to move your cows from one paddock to the other?
I guess I'm not following you on that.
When the paddocks are touching, the vibration of the collar.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, sorry.
So when you move in the halter app, it sends a signal. You need to overlap your boundaries, but it will, when the fence opens up to move them to the next one, it will push the cows either way, so they kind of head that way and tell them there's new pasture. And that does, as far as training goes, I think that takes quite a bit of time. Our cows have finally figured it out. I mean, you give them a paddock now, they're there, but when we first put them on, it took a long time to get that. So it sometimes take a day. There'd still be some back, but we weren't pushing them hard either.
Awesome. Does that answer your question, Brett, from that standpoint of it? Okay, great. Where are we? Yes.
So you just touched on some of it, of the process of moving the cows. And how do they know when you move the boundary? Is it just for them constantly checking to see if they hear it? Or do they get, when you're moving them 3 or 4 times a day, I'm sure they're expecting it. Are they always checking the fence to see, well, has the fence moved? Can I go further? Do you have to be there? Or can you kind of go into more detail of how you do that with the cows or how they're trained?
There's always elite cows in the herd, right? And they're kind of the ones constantly checking. Austin touched on it earlier. He can see, and I can see in my app too, which ones are initiating that tone the most. And those are the cows always checking the boundary. And they'll go over there many times a day and search for that. And then to what you said, once you kind of get them in the pattern where they're getting moved every day, it's no different with polywire. They're kind of expecting to be moved, right? And so they're checking that front boundary. They can see the fresh grass ahead of them.
That is one interesting thing is cow behavior. It has changed even in 2 months. I wouldn't necessarily say good or bad. It's just different. Like someday, I think the first month, I would say when I went over in the Ranger and checked them, they were expecting to be moved or, something, and they would kind of come to me. Yesterday, I gave them the new shift before I went. It was really early in the morning. I got over there right after daylight, and the cows did not come to the Ranger at all, and they were 100 feet away. They were just grazing, happy. And I would say that's obviously different. Usually they would come straight up to me and want to know. I'm not saying it's good or bad, I guess. It's just the cow behavior has definitely changed.
To couple on that, I think you can affect cow behavior within how you schedule your moves and things like that. When I was moving 3-4 times a day, those cows knew they were moving at 6:30, 9:30, noon, and 3. So they're out there checking the line. When I went to once a day moves, and I've done both evening and morning moves, you talk about changing when a cow's grazing, just change your moves. All of a sudden you change in the evenings, she's gonna be grazing more actively in the evenings. You change in the morning, she's gonna actively graze through the morning. It's just, you can affect cow behavior so much. And I don't know, Caitlin, do you have the video of the cow bounce back and forth across the line?
Yep.
Especially like for me, grazing annuals, where you're strip grazing and mowing it down essentially. Those cows will get, like right here, this cow, it's a video. She's just walking that line the entire time, bouncing her head back and forth. And that's when I was doing like 3-hour moves, and I'm only giving them like a 15-foot strip, and they're just constantly grazing on that line.
And that's the cow that'll move the whole rest of the group when it's time to move. That's the one right there.
She'll swing her head back, give it time to clear, then start eating, and they know it's a 5-second tone. They get to graze there for 4 seconds before I get shocked.
No, that's great. I was like, I'm told to go there first, and then we'll go back to the middle. Oh, I'm getting lots of finger points. Okay, let's go here first.
Myself?
Yes.
Okay. It's interesting to hear firsthand from the users of this technology, and then brings up opportunities for improvement by the tech companies. I can see two scenarios here playing out. One is the area of adjusting the band. You know, if you have to regularly visit your farm to readjust the band, and while we're all trying to save labor, they could think of designing automatic band movements, where if you model the gain of, say, a young heifer or calf, by ensuring that this belt is able to adjust automatically over time as the days go by. Again, you can also think of putting, say, a camera. I don't know if there's a camera in that design. But these are areas of further improvements that the tech people can work on.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'd love to see maybe a little bit of elastic, a little bit of stretch in the band to give a little bit of forgiveness both in growth and when she milks down, just a little bit either way. Might save one trip through the chute.
Okay, I had a couple questions, and I think, Daniel, you mentioned changing the colors of the dots. Can you talk a little bit to how you've used that in different ways with your herd? And then also, in general, having multiple people logged in to the app, like myself, my father-in-law, my husband, how does that work with the different systems? Those two different pieces.
Yeah, so on the first one, changing the color, it was just that one example I said where I had like cull cows within the rest of the herd, and then I was getting them up. It was once a week there for a while, just pulling one animal off at a time. And so just to be able to have a boundary specific to those, there's like 7 cows where the rest of the herd, it was made into a different, they were in the same pasture grazing, right? Mm-hmm. I was strip grazing Milo, actually, is what I was doing. So the main group, 40 of them or so, was one group, and they shared a boundary with the cull cow group while they were grazing. And then so the once a week when I needed to get the cull cows up, on that move, those cull cows got a different boundary that day that led up to the catch pen. And so I would just turn it on for that time when I needed to catch them. The rest of the cows that were in the separate group in the software, they just continued on their strip for the day like they had been.
I was envisioning like a cat, like if you're calving and you could change, once they've calved,
Yeah.
change those.
I haven't done that, but I think
Other
Chris
ways
has.
to approach it.
So that's my plan this fall on the cows that I currently have the collars on. And to answer your other question, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 of us logged onto my account. I haven't had any issues that I'm aware of. And our plan, since I may check cows this morning, my brother may check cows tonight, you just don't know, like through calving, we're gonna change colors on the cow dots within the app as they calve. That way, when whoever's checking cows that evening says, I know that there's 4 left to calve, instead of riding the gator through going, where are them 4 at, whatever, I can pull my app up and say, that cow's over in this area, let's go there first, and then associate those colors with calving is our plan this fall. And we did a little bit of that last fall, but it was too late. But for calving, so I have 50 collars that the Circle program provided me with. The main set of cows I've got them on, there's 40 of them. There's 10 other collars I wasn't using. I'll put it this way for the peace of mind aspect. I threw those 10 collars on another set of cows, just on 10 random cows. I'm not using them for the virtual fence. I'm just using them so I can say, at least 10 of these cows, I know where they're at out of that group of 40. That to me, it was that peace of mind that, well, at least 10 of them are still inside the permanent fence. Just stuff like that. I mean, her example with combining and calving, that was me cutting beans last fall. I had 4 cows left to calve in that group. Instead of shutting the combine off to go check those 4 cows, I'd pull up my app. Are any of them off by themselves? Nope. I'm going to keep cutting beans. I'll check them tomorrow morning.
Kind of like with a lame cow or just different pieces you could.
Yeah, I'm constantly, maybe not constantly, but Dan gave me trouble this spring. I look at that app a lot. Just, what are cows doing? Are they off by themselves? Are they loafing? It's kind of made me, there's so many peace of mind aspects. It's information at your fingertips.
I have a cool calving story to kind of add, and I think Chris is probably going to find him using it this way this fall. But so walking through spring calving cows this year, walking through them at some point during the day, and okay, she's getting really close. She's going to calve. This happened on probably 4 or 5 cows this spring. That evening, about 9 o'clock at night, right when after dark, I could look and I could see that she was off by herself. They were getting bigger areas during calving, bigger paddocks. She was off by herself. So I went ahead and had that tag wrote up that next morning, had the sire number wrote on the tag and everything. And I had never even looked to see if she had had the calf. I just, I knew from that and I could identify which cow, get out my book, write the sire number on the tag. And then there was less stress that way because we all know when we go take a look which cow number it is, she'll pick that calf up and leave. There wasn't any of that this spring on those few cows because I could just walk straight to her and tag the calf. That was kind of cool.
On the Monil app, we can, in terms of your user question, I'm the administrator, but I can add as I want, as far as I know. You can also have like view only. So if you wanted someone that outside your organization or something, they can still view it. So
There, it's behind you, Austin. I was like, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about the map.
So this is a long, narrow pasture, and then I've already grazed this over here, and then I let them have this strip, and then I opened up all this back to go to the north pasture, and then there's an alley along the crop field to get to there. And then on the north side, I'll graze up that, and then I'll come back on the other side. So obviously, there's always some overlap because I'm watering out of creeks, so there's always gonna be some overlap. But try to save as much of the grass and let as much area rest as we can. So I didn't trust the collars completely yet because there was growing wheat there. So I gave them plenty of room, and there's a physical hot wire. Honestly, the physical hot wire was not hooked up though. It's just a blind. So. But they traveled fine. One funny thing is I'm the blue dot up there, and all those cows came up and they started grazing in that 25-foot wide non-hot hot wire, and it started making me really nervous because they stopped at the gate. I have no idea why they stopped there. Nobody got beeped. I was sitting there watching the whole time, and so I slowly made my way through the wheat and back around them just so I could monitor the situation. And they finally went, but it took them 15, 20 minutes to go through the blue gate. I've no idea why. I don't feed them much grain, so I didn't have any grain or anything with me to entice them with. One cow up there you can see, 6101, she went through. Everybody else just stood there looking at her like, what are you doing? So I don't know. These are lagging too, by the way. These dots, all the cows move together. They graze very tightly. It's one piece of this that's shocking is how tight they graze. Like these cows had 4 acres there. They will graze in a 1/4 acre all the time.
I didn't know if you wanted to hit.
Yeah, so this is kind of cool. So this ground's had a year of rest. It's in timber. I'm only going to graze it once, so I'm grazing it really intensively. But the picture on the right is the aftermath, and the picture on the left is what it looked like before. And that's not exactly the same exact area, but that's a pretty good representation of what it looks like. So.
And there's just another good example of a grazing line.
Yeah, so this was our original training paddock, actually. So this is a regraze. This was just taken the other day. But you can see the virtual fence line kind of up through there. right on the brown, there's more bare spots and obviously less clumping. I'm not pushing them extremely hard here, but yeah, you can see the line pretty well. And like I said, it's just 10% that are actually getting beeped at. The rest of them are just hanging behind.
Real quick on the light thing, Gavin, will you talk about the light on the halter collars and how you can switch that?
Yeah, on the halter collars, you can go in and select an individual animal and have her LED light show up a certain color. So if you, like they said, when we were calving a lot, you could go in at night and you could have a collar be beeping red or blue or whatever. And they actually had a pretty cool feature at Christmas where it was jingle bells and the collars all they were singing jingle bells with green and red lights. You know, our boys really liked it. That we went out there at night and it was pretty cool.
Awesome. I was like, where am I at? Yes.
Are any of you getting automatic reports, like for calving, for lame, for in heat, or are you having to observe that behavior in the way that the dots have reported themselves?
I'll get an automatic update for called a downed cow. For me, that meant the collar had fallen off.
Collar's lost or
Yeah,
come on.
it didn't detect movement for a certain period of time, so you get a automatic update pushed to you for that, and then also an update for when the cow's outside the boundary. You get that pushed to
But
you.
nothing that's reporting active, hey, this cow looks like it's in heat because she's being followed by this.
Yeah, I don't think there's any of that in the Gallagher software yet. So.
On the halter collars, we had 52 head, and we AI'd all them cows, and it said that 39 of the 52 were bred, and there's been 13 in heat. And then we have one on the bull, and it said it hadn't been in heat yet, so the activity. So, but it did, I mean, I don't know if they're confirmed bred yet. We haven't checked them, but it did say, I mean, that'd be a really good conception rate if it was, but I doubt they'll all stay.
The other question I have is, are any of you experiencing moving cows from farm to farm? And how difficult or challenging or easy is that? You just pause the collars, I'm hearing, or do you not have to pause them? They just automatically will sense they're in another farm?
So the way we moved ours is the Monil app, you can just draw a giant square, and I just dropped a giant square over, it was actually a different county, and just assigned all those collars to that giant square. And then once we actually unloaded it and everybody had updated and all the green dots were where they were supposed to be, then I drug the square in. And I mean, it covered 30 square miles when I dropped it, but we were literally on trailers. So I wanted to be sure we weren't going to shock anything.
So I walk a county road between 3 farms quite often, and what I'll do the day before I want to move, I'll put a poly wire up for that paddock, because what I'm doing is I'm turning that paddock off that they're in and turning on the one that they're headed to. So it's on before I call them out the gate up on the road, and then it's like a one-way gate. So as they pass into that new farm, into that new boundary, it turns on, their collar's activated. So that's how I'm using it there when moving. So it's on already, even if they're not there yet. And then as I walk, they cross into that boundary, and that's it. They're locked in. Yep.
With the halter, I drew an alleyway through a bean field this winter, and they were still kind of trading. I did have a little trouble getting them moved, but part of that was user error. There is some of that you do have to learn how to use it, but it worked just fine. I mean, they could have went either way. There was good fence, but I just wanted to see if it would work. It was about a 60 wide alley. I mean, it was hard you had to watch your phone to even stay in there to drive, to get them to follow you right, but it worked.
Did we have a question farther in the back?
Yes. So the virtual fencing grazing program, as we all know, is being funded or sponsored by the National Fish and Wildlife Federation. I was wondering if any of you could speak to what you have observed about the wildlife and the bird population, if you do that or is a concern.
I've been managing my grazing long rest periods for almost 10 years now, and that part having habitat for the other wildlife species notice it from that. So I didn't start with virtual collars doing that, so I can't say that's the reason why I'm seeing quail and turkey and meadowlarks and other things like that. One thing I will note on wildlife is the deer aren't running through my polywire every night. So.
Yeah, I think the big thing is you have to compare somebody like Dan, who's been already doing those things, to somebody who hasn't. And somebody who hasn't, that maybe is just turning 40 cows loose on 70 acres of pasture, and there they are for the summer, probably is going to see a lot more effect than Dan on, hey, I'm going to all of a sudden implement some rotational grazing. And it doesn't have to be daily moves or 3-hour moves. It can be 7-day moves or whatever. I think that's where the difference comes in.
It's a low barrier of entry to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
The collars are a low barrier of entry.
And to me, we've used rotational grazing for a long time, but I'm not to the point, I never have been to the point Dan has. I'm 10-day moves, 7-day moves. This allows me to go to 1-day moves. This allows me to go to 3-day moves or 3-hour moves. And that part, I think, will help over time. And maybe not with the wildlife, but with the grass species we've got, with the diversity within pastures, with all those things. One thing I noticed, and again, I'm a little different. Mostly I've grazed just annuals, cover crops on row crop ground. I've noticed I've always had trouble with my cover crop species. You go graze a mix and turn 40 cows out on 40 acres, pull them off, you'll get the cereal rye, the cereal grains to regrow, but the legumes don't handle grazing well. When I've moved to doing 1-day rotations or 3-hour rotations and having a decent rest period and flash grazing it more, I'm getting more legumes coming back. For me, that may not sound like a big deal on row crop ground, but if I'm going to corn the next year, all of a sudden that becomes more of a big deal. And that's a benefit I've seen.
I think we're going to take 2 more quick questions, and then we're going to break for lunch.
Yeah, so I just had a question as far as like putting those collars on like freshly weaned calves, or have you guys, or can you guys speak to using those collars to fence line weaned cattle in the same paddock? You kind of alluded to like highlighting those dots or getting cull cows up to segregate off, but do you think that's an option to do with those collars to fence line wean cows against calves?
I haven't collared any young calves like that, 600 pound calves. I don't know if anybody has. Sounds like Tim's going to try to. What I would predict is it's not going to work very well. The collars are more of a suggestion. Your high tensile wire with a good charger on it's far more powerful than the collars are. So I don't think you're going to keep a calf from going to mom with. I put my fence checker on one time and it was 3.5 volts. So I don't think your calf's going to respect that, especially with a good hair coat and mama standing right there with milk. I don't think you're going to keep them away.
And I'm not using them to wean. I'm just getting them on the calves. So yeah, I agree with you.
And I will probably be the one person sitting up here who will say I've had some problems with boundaries and cows starting to ignore boundaries. Grazing Milo this winter, I probably was pushing a little bit too hard, conserving resources. And the way grazing Milo works, you're eating that fodder, you're eating the grain, and that's your carbohydrates, that's your protein, that's whatever. And you're not always keeping that cow's belly full. So she's constantly going, hey, I want to fill my belly up. Well, if you're only giving them a limited amount and she's not getting her belly full, all of a sudden I started having some issues with cows escaping. So I had to figure out how to keep their bellies a little fuller grazing Milo. So what I'm getting at here is as Dan said, the collar is a suggestion. You can certainly, once they figure out that, hey, I get shocked 3 times when I cross that line, but after that 3 times, I'm good. Yeah, I think it doesn't take the place of a fence.
This fall, I was going to try. We always have to bring all our cows home when we wean, just because we're within like a 3-mile section. They can hear the calves bawling. I'm going to try to leave those cows with the collars on. I'm going to try to leave them in the pasture they're in, just because it does get to be a problem when you put all the cows together. We just run out of grazing. And I'm going to try to use the collars as that secondary fence to keep them in. Maybe they'll stay, maybe they won't.
And I did do that this spring. I weaned calves, nothing but a single strand of hot wire and the collars on those cows, and hauled the calves away, had no issues, none. But I don't think you can fence line wean with nothing but the collar.
Yeah. Do you want to go to our last question before lunch?
Sure. Have you left them on year round, or is that your plan? You're not going to take them off in the wintertime? And do you have any trouble with fence or feeders, hay feeders?
So I only used a hay feeder for 2 days and I quit because I lost 2 collars in that time frame. They basically just slip them past their ears. So yeah, the little bit of hay I did feed this past winter, I had to unroll because it just wasn't working in racks.
I've obviously not had them on during winter, but our intention would be to unroll or bale graze or both. Obviously, I mean, with all of this, our intention is to graze even longer into the winter. So, but yeah, we probably will not be using hay rings for cows with collars.
Yeah, we left them on year round. I unroll hay, no issues. That yeah.